A woman betrayed not once, but twice by the two people she trusted most. Her husband, her mother. What started as a secret affair spiraled into lies, obsession, and murder. This is the chilling true story of family, deception, and a deadly betrayal. Welcome to Unfolded Enigmas. Today's case: the husband, the mother-in-law, and a crime that shattered a family. Julia Bennett always considered her life, if not perfect, then close to it. At 35, she lived in a suburban area of Austin, Texas, in a spacious house with a neat garden and a white picket fence. Her husband, Marcus Bennett, was a successful attorney at a large law firm specializing in corporate affairs. He worked hard, often staying late at the office, but he always returned home with a smile on his face, ready to spend time with their children. Their son, Lucas, was 8 years old, and their daughter, Emily, was just 5. The children were Julia's greatest joy. She worked as an elementary school teacher and loved dedicating her free time to raising them. Julia and Marcus had met back in college. At the time, she was a student in the education department, dreaming of becoming a teacher and helping children succeed academically. Marcus, on the other hand, was a promising law student, always confident and driven. Their relationship developed quickly, and just a year after they met, they got married. Their life seemed to follow a carefully planned path: a successful marriage, careers, children, and a home in a good neighborhood. Julia was proud of her marriage. She believed that she and Marcus had weathered many challenges together, overcome all difficulties, and preserved their love. Of course, there were moments when she felt their marriage was at risk, but each time they found a way to resolve their issues. Whether it was the stress from work, the children's illnesses, or financial concerns, they always stood by each other. For Julia, Marcus was not just a husband, he was her best friend and partner. Their home was filled with laughter and joy. In the evenings, they would play family games, watch movies together, and on weekends, they often went on picnics in the park or took trips to Lake Travis, where they had a small boat. These moments of family happiness seemed so natural that Julia never imagined anything could go wrong. But gradually, Julia began to notice changes in Marcus. At first, it was small things. He started staying late at work more often, and he stopped suggesting evening walks or dinners as frequently. Then his mood began to shift. He seemed more distant, lost in his thoughts. Julia attributed this to work stress. Marcus was the lead attorney in complex cases, and she understood that his job required a lot of effort and time. She tried to support him by creating a cozy and warm atmosphere at home where he could relax after a long day at work. However, over time, her worries only grew. Marcus became even more closed off from her. He would sometimes leave for the weekend, explaining it as business trips, though they used to always spend weekends together. At some point, Julia noticed that he had become more secretive with his phone. He used to leave it on the table without a second thought, but now he often kept it out of her sight. Julia felt that something was wrong, but she was afraid to ask direct questions. Her inner voice told her that she needed to find out what was going on, but another part of her was afraid of what she might discover. She tried to talk to Marcus carefully, asking questions about his work and mood, but each time he reassured her that everything was fine, that she was worrying too much, and that he was just tired. This would temporarily calm her anxieties, but only for a short while. During these moments, Julia increasingly turned to her mother, Denise, for advice. Denise had moved to Austin a few years ago to be closer to the family and often visited them. For Julia, she was not just a mother but a true friend. They could talk for hours about life, share their concerns, and discuss family matters. Denise had always been a source of wisdom and support for Julia, and she trusted her with her most intimate thoughts. Julia still hoped that these were just temporary difficulties and that their family would overcome them. She didn't want to believe the worst, continuing to hope for the best. After all, they had a good life, wonderful children, and many years of shared happiness. How could it all fall apart? These thoughts haunted Julia as she tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy. She continued with her daily tasks, taking care of the children and keeping the house in order. She tried to distract herself from dark thoughts, convincing herself that everything would get better. But deep down, she already knew that big changes were on the horizon. Julia had no idea that her usual morning in their cozy home would turn into a living nightmare. It all began when she accidentally noticed Marcus's phone left on the kitchen table. He had left for work early that morning, and the house was wrapped in a calm stillness. The children weren't home, they had stayed with their grandmother for the weekend, and Julia had planned to spend some time on herself. She was brewing coffee and gazing out the window at their green yard when she saw her husband's phone screen light up with an incoming message. Julia wasn't the type to spy on her husband, but something in that moment made her focus on the screen. She stepped closer and saw that the message was from her mother. Only the beginning of the sentence was visible. "I can't wait to see you again." Those words caught her off guard. She had no reason to suspect her mother or her husband, but the message seemed strange. Why was her mother saying such things to Marcus? Curiosity mixed with anxiety took over. She picked up the phone and, without hesitation, unlocked it. She and Marcus had never kept passwords from each other, so the phone was easily accessible. When she opened the conversation, Julia froze in place. Her mother, Denise, and Marcus had been exchanging messages for months. These weren't just friendly or family-related talks. Every line was filled with hidden passion and intimate moments that Julia never thought her mother and husband could share with each other. The messages were full of hints about secret meetings, hidden embraces, and suggestive comments. They discussed how carefully they were hiding their relationship so that no one would suspect anything. In one recent message, her mother wrote, "You're so cautious. No one will ever know. It'll stay just between us." Julia felt her heart clench in pain. She sat in the kitchen feeling like the ground was slipping out from under her feet. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she couldn't allow herself to break down, not yet. She needed to gather all the facts to understand how deep this betrayal went. She continued scrolling through the messages, uncovering more and more details. Each message felt like a punch to the heart. It seemed as if every new phrase tore her apart. Her mother and her husband had been finding excuses to meet behind her back. They were deceiving her, not just about themselves, but also about their children. There were mentions of how they pretended at family events, acting like everything was fine. Julia couldn't believe this was happening in her life. Several hours had passed since she found the phone. All this time, she sat there engulfed in shock and grief, trying to figure out what to do next. Her mother, the one person she had always trusted, had betrayed her. Her husband, the man she had shared a life with and raised her children with, had turned out to be a liar. She knew she couldn't just let this go. But what should she do? At that moment, Julia wasn't ready for a confrontation. She felt betrayed, but she didn't yet know how to act. She decided to remain calm and avoid any rash actions. First, she needed to gather more information. She knew that this phone would now be her key to the truth. Her mind was racing with thoughts of what to do next, and a plan was starting to form in her heart. Over the next few days, Julia tried to act as if everything were normal. She smiled at Marcus, discussed future plans with him, and pretended that everything was just as it had always been. But in her mind, there wasn't a single moment of peace. Every night, she would check his phone while he slept, gathering more and more evidence of their affair. All this time, her heart was being torn apart by pain and fury. She also began to avoid meeting with her mother, afraid that she wouldn't be able to stop herself from blurting out everything that had built up inside her. But at the same time, she felt that Denise suspected her daughter had found something out. This added to the tension in their relationship, and Julia started planning how she would confront them with the truth. On July 14, 2023, the Bennett household was steeped in tense silence. Julia couldn't find peace day or night. Every time she looked at Marcus, a wave of pain and betrayal washed over her. She could no longer hide her emotions but tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy for the sake of the children. Marcus, sensing that something had changed between them, began acting suspiciously. He noticed that Julia had become cold and distant, but he hesitated to ask what was wrong. Perhaps he hoped that things would smooth over on their own, or maybe he just didn't want to escalate the problem. However, deep down he knew things had already gone too far, and the truth couldn't be hidden for much longer. That evening, everything seemed ordinary. The children were having dinner in the living room, Julia was preparing food in the kitchen, and Marcus sat at the table reading the news on his tablet. But beneath this veneer of normality, emotions were simmering, ready to erupt. The air was thick with a sense of impending catastrophe. When the children went to bed, the silence became suffocating. Julia glanced at Marcus again, feeling that she could no longer bear this pretense. All day, she had been tormented by thoughts of how they had reached this point. Her husband and her mother, the two closest people in her life, had turned out to be traitors. This thought was tearing her apart. She couldn't stay silent any longer. She approached him, trying to remain calm, though inside she was boiling. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tense but firm. Marcus looked up from his tablet, a cautious expression on his face. He sensed that something was wrong but couldn't quite grasp what it was. He pretended not to understand, hoping to avoid the conversation. What exactly do you want to talk about?" he asked, trying to conceal his anxiety. Julia froze, her eyes full of pain and fury. She wanted to unleash everything at once, to scream at him, to throw accusations, but instead, she held back, knowing that yelling wouldn't help. "I know everything, Marcus." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I know about you and my mother." Those words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus instantly went pale, his hands trembling as the tablet slipped from his fingers, landing with a dull thud on the table. He didn't know what to say. Panic flared up inside him. He hadn't expected Julia to find out the truth, at least not so soon. "Julia, it's not what you think," he began, trying to find an excuse, but he knew it was pointless. Julia raised her hand, stopping him. "Don't. I've seen your messages. All of them. You lied to me. You betrayed our family. And now I want to know, how could you?" Her voice trembled, but she tried to stay strong. Marcus lowered his head, unable to find the words. He understood that any response would only make things worse. A torrent of thoughts ran through his mind, from guilt to fear for his life. He knew she was furious and could only guess what she might do next. But instead of continuing the confrontation, Julia simply turned and headed for the door. Her body trembled with tension, and she knew that if she stayed there another minute, she might lose control. She stepped outside, inhaling the cool night air, trying to calm her shattered mind. She stood in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night, trying to collect her thoughts. But inside the house, a turning point was occurring. Marcus, gripped by panic, decided he had nothing left to lose. His mind, overtaken by fear and despair, began generating the worst possible scenarios. He thought that Julia would go further. Perhaps she would tell everyone, destroy his life, his career. He rose from his chair, his gaze clouded. Suddenly, he felt anger mixed with desperation. Images of a possible future flashed in his mind. Humiliation, the destruction of his reputation, the loss of everything he had ever built. This fear turned into rage. He could no longer afford to lose control of the situation. Julia didn't realize when the door behind her quietly opened, and Marcus, like a shadow, appeared beside her. He approached her from behind, and before she could say or do anything, Marcus suddenly grabbed her by the throat. Her scream was muffled by his hand as he began to squeeze his fingers tighter. Julia desperately tried to free herself, her hands grasping helplessly at his, but he was stronger. Her body thrashed in a desperate attempt to draw breath, but with every passing second, her strength ebbed away. Her eyes widened in terror as she realized that her own husband, the man she loved, was trying to kill her. The night was dark and quiet, and no one heard the sounds of their struggle. Only the moon stood as a silent witness to the horrifying scene unfolding in the shadows of the house. When it was all over, Marcus stood over Julia's body, breathing heavily, his hands trembling. He looked at her lifeless face, and his mind finally grasped what he had just done. This wasn't a dream, not a nightmare. This was reality. Inside him, everything tightened with horror and guilt. There was no turning back now. On the morning of July 15, 2023, as the first rays of the sun began to pierce through the trees, police cars arrived on the quiet suburban street in Austin. A neighbor had noticed that something was wrong at the Bennett residence and called the police. Detective Jessica Miller, a seasoned investigator with years of experience, was the first to arrive on the scene. As the police approached the house, they were met by Marcus Bennett. He looked disheveled, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept all night. He stood on the porch, his hands trembling, but he was trying to maintain control. "What happened?" Detective Miller asked, scrutinizing Marcus carefully. She noticed his nervousness but refrained from jumping to conclusions. "My wife." His voice was quiet and shaky. "I found her in the backyard. She's dead." The words came out cold and lifeless. Marcus lowered his head, as if trying to hide his emotions. Detective Miller immediately sensed that something was off but decided not to rush. She was accustomed to working methodically, gathering facts piece by piece before making any judgments. The police quickly cordoned off the area, and forensic experts began examining the crime scene. Julia Bennett's body lay on the grass in the backyard. There were visible marks of strangulation on her neck, making the initial assumption clear: she had been strangled. Detective Miller carefully inspected the body and the scene. There were no signs of a struggle nearby, which raised questions in her mind. If Julia had been strangled here in the backyard, why weren't there any indications that she had fought back? Her clothes were undisturbed, and it seemed as though she had simply stepped outside, only never to return. The detectives began by questioning Marcus. He sat in the kitchen, his gaze distant, seemingly unable to process what had happened. His answers were brief, and Detective Miller noticed that he avoided eye contact. "You say you found her this morning?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus replied without looking up. "I just went out into the yard and saw her there. I don't know what happened." "And where were you last night?" Miller continued, trying to keep her tone gentle but firm. Marcus hesitated, then answered, "I was at home. After the kids went to bed, I went to my room and fell asleep. I woke up early this morning and went outside." The detectives carefully documented his statement, but Miller knew this was only the beginning. She had seen how people behaved when they were hiding something. Perhaps he was just in shock over his wife's death, but something about his demeanor troubled her. The next step was to interview the neighbors. They were shocked by what had happened and shared their observations. Some mentioned hearing muffled voices late at night, but they hadn't thought much of it. No one had seen anything suspicious, making the investigation more challenging. However, soon the investigation took an interesting turn. Miller learned that Julia had recently confided in a friend, telling her about family problems and hinting at something terrible she had discovered. Her friend Emily agreed to meet with the detectives, and what she revealed was a bombshell for the investigation. "Julia told me she found out about Marcus's affair with her mother," Emily said when she met with the detectives at her home. "She was devastated. She didn't know what to do. We talked just a couple of days ago. She said she felt betrayed and didn't know how to go on." This revelation changed everything. Miller understood that they were now dealing with a far more complex situation than it had initially seemed. Family drama, betrayal, and murder, all of it painted a disturbing picture. The detectives began examining Julia's phone, messages, and emails. This became the next key step in the investigation. They discovered exchanges between Julia and her mother confirming the affair with Marcus. The messages were full of guilt and fear of being found out. Julia's mother had pleaded with her not to destroy everything they had built. Now, the detectives had enough evidence to arrest Marcus Bennett. His motives became clearer: the fear of being exposed, the fear of losing everything he had. Detective Miller knew all too well that such situations often led to violence when a person in desperation tried to maintain control over their life. Soon, more evidence emerged. Traces found on Marcus's clothing matched those on Julia's body. He couldn't explain this, and his alibi began to crumble. Meanwhile, Denise Bennett, Julia's mother, was called in for questioning. She seemed deeply shocked by the news of her daughter's death, but Detective Miller immediately noticed that beneath the facade of grief, something more was lurking. Denise tried to appear as the grieving mother who had lost her child, but her nervous gestures and unnatural explanations revealed underlying tension. Gradually, the pressure of the interrogation became unbearable, and Denise broke down. She admitted to the affair with Marcus, claiming she had tried to end the relationship. According to her, she had no idea of Marcus's intentions and was horrified by what had happened. As Detective Jessica Miller led Marcus Bennett into the interrogation room, her heart tightened with tension. She knew that the moment of truth had arrived. All the evidence they had gathered over the past few days pointed to Marcus as the primary suspect in Julia Bennett's murder. However, Miller was well aware that investigations often had unexpected twists, and she had to be prepared for anything. Marcus looked exhausted. His once neat appearance had become disheveled, and his eyes, which once radiated confidence, were now filled with fear and confusion. When he sat down across from Detective Miller, she noticed how hard he was trying to hold himself together, but every movement betrayed the inner turmoil he was experiencing. "Marcus," Miller began in a calm voice, "we know there were problems in your family. We know about the affair with Julia's mother. And now, we have evidence that you were near her the night she died." Marcus clenched his fists, his face contorting with pain and anger. "I didn't want it to end this way," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with the detective. Miller noticed how his fingers nervously drummed on the table. Her goal was simple: to get him to confess. She understood that psychological pressure could break him, but she didn't want to rush. A slow, methodical investigation was her approach, and she intended to follow it to the end. "Marcus," she continued, leaning in slightly, "we know you felt trapped. Julia found out the truth, and you were scared of what would happen next." Those words seemed to strike a nerve in Marcus. He quickly lifted his head and looked at Miller. His eyes flickered between anger and fear, and Miller knew that his emotional defenses were crumbling. "You don't understand," he began, his voice trembling. "It was all so complicated. I loved Julia, but then everything spiraled out of control. I didn't know how to handle it." Miller nodded to show that she was listening and not judging him. This was a crucial moment in the interrogation, to make him feel that she was on his side, that she was willing to hear his story. "Tell me what happened that night," she gently urged. Marcus was silent for a few moments, as if weighing his words. And then he exhaled deeply. "She found the messages," he began. "She saw that we were texting. She was furious. I tried to explain. I tried to calm her down. But she wouldn't listen. Julia threatened to tell everyone. To destroy our family. I didn't know what to do." His voice broke as he recounted the events. Miller could see him reliving each moment, which only strengthened her belief that he was truly guilty. "I didn't want it to end like this," Marcus continued. "We started arguing. She pushed me, and then I just lost control. I didn't know what I was doing. When it was over, she was lying on the ground, and I realized what I had done." Miller remained calm, giving Marcus time to process his actions. Her task now was to extract as many details as possible to corroborate his confession and solidify the case against him. "Marcus," she said after a pause, "what did you do after it happened?" He fell silent, his gaze becoming vacant. "I just walked away. I couldn't look at her. I went back inside and sat there, not knowing what to do. I waited until morning, and then pretended that I had just found her." Those words were a crucial element in the investigation. Now, Detective Miller had not only Marcus's confession but also his account of the events of that night. She knew that this would be a key moment in court, and her job was to ensure that the case was brought to a successful conclusion. News of Marcus's arrest quickly spread through the local media, and within days, everyone was talking about it. The story of a man who killed his wife after she discovered his affair with her mother became a topic of discussion not only in their small town but across the country. Soon, the trial began. The prosecution presented all the collected evidence: Marcus's confession, the messages between him and Julia's mother, the proof that he had been at the scene of the crime at the time of the murder. The defense attorneys tried to appeal to Marcus's emotional state, arguing that he had acted in a state of extreme emotional distress and could not fully control his actions. However, the evidence was too strong. The court sentenced Marcus Bennett to 55 years in prison without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Julia Bennett received justice, but the price of that justice had been tragically high. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime stories. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below.